quietly together and wish not to be disturbed. Something like that. They've gotten their throat, and it's over with. He picked up the phone and called the telegraph office. It's Frank Wright, he said. Look, about that telegram from the Tribune, just send one back to them from me. Say this. Let there be no misunderstanding. A Mrs. E.H. Cheney never existed for me, and now is no more, in fact. But Mama forthwith is here.
I'll take a look at it because I just...
It's the only way the editors will have it.
Well, I'll do it later. Let me just do that wall.
Okay.
Then we'll do this.
This is so bad. Come out swinging like that. I understand it, but there's a more dignified way. Mama went and retrieved the notes they had composed the night before. Do it as we said, darling, will you? She said, handing him the paper. I'm no good at recitation. He sighed, but when he saw her worried look, he muttered, All right, I'll read the darn thing. At 10, there were 6 reporters gathered around the fireplace, from papers in Chicago, Milwaukee, Madison, and Spring Green. 4 reporters who were supposed to be fiercely competitive, the men were behaving like old chums. They seemed to have formed a quick camaraderie, the way travelers do when they find themselves thrown together in a strange place. Frank assumed a position in front of them, standing in his long red robe with one arm propped on the hearth. When Mama entered the room, they turned and masked, then jotted madly in their notebooks. Mama took a chair as Frank began to speak. In the first place, I haven't abandoned my children or deserted any woman, nor have I eloped with any man's wife. There has been nothing clandestine about this affair in any of its aspects. I have been trying to live honestly. I have been living honestly. Mrs. E.H. Cheney never existed for me. She was always Mama Borthwick to me, an individual separate and distinct, who was not any man's possession. Frank glanced toward me.
Except his now.
He seemed to be in full command of his faculties, almost glad to be in front of an audience. The children, my children, are as well provided for as they ever were. I love them as much as any father could, but I suppose I haven't been a good father to them. Certainly, I regard it as a tragedy that things should have come about as they have, but I could not act differently if I had it all to do over again. Mrs. Wright wanted children, loved children, and understood children. She had her life in them. She played with them and enjoyed them. But I found my life in my work. Frank set down his notes on the hearth. You see, I started out to give expression to certain ideals in architecture. I wanted to create something organic, something sound and wholesome, American in spirit and beautiful, it might be. I think I have succeeded in that. In a way, my buildings are my children. She would have taken one of the workmen's guns and shot dead the reporter who had tracked John down to poke at his wounds.
Violence.
She remembered the moment when they were in Canada, when she had tried to explain to John what divorce meant. He had squirmed out of her arms and slipped away to play. That was the thing about children. Even if John had not, even if he had said he understood, he wouldn't have. He is 9 years old, she thought. All he knows is the feeling inside himself, the terrible longing. What could the word divorce really mean to a child that young? Or to Martha? To rush out seeking men's work was to abandon her post by the cradle as the shaper of the human race. Far better, Ellen argued, that the emancipators worked toward rewarding and enhancing the job of mother. It was not the first time Mama had come upon the argument. Ellen had leveled it in Love and Ethics, too. But it had not been the main focus of that. And if we don't plant them now... He looked over her choices, then added 20 sumac trees to the list. Frank mentioned one afternoon in the middle of May that the plants were due in a day or two. He'd hired a couple of trucks to bring the shipment over from the Spring Green train station when it arrived, and they would need extra hands to unload. There are 2 boys over at the Barton place, Josiah offered. Do you know them? She asked. Nice family, Josiah said. Boys will be in school till afternoon, but I'd get them over here now to start digging holes. Will you arrange it? Yes, ma'am. Josiah went to make the phone call from the kitchen. "Tell them I will come to pick up the boys tomorrow," she whispered as he was calling. "I can get them," he said. "Thank you, Josiah, but I'll go." Mama had observed the little farmstead every time she drove along County Road C. It was like almost every other country farmhouse in the area. A whitewashed, clapboard house with a swatch of cut grass in front of it, a barn, a windbreak to the north, and fields of crops that ran right up to the yard. She remembered the first time she'd taken real notice of this one. Driving past, she had caught sight of a small girl balanced over the top rung of the white fence, dangling a string toward a cat below her. A few feet away, rabbit skins were stretched out on the fence, drying. Mama had told Josiah to make her identity clear to the mother who answered the phone. Miss Mama Borthwick from over at the Wright place would be coming to pick up her sons if they could be spared for some planting work at
I bet she won't let him go.
Standing next to the telephone as he spoke, Mama waited for a polite refusal. "They'll be ready for you at 3 o'clock, Josiah said. Mama let out a breath trapped in her lungs. "Oh," she said with some wonder. "Isn't that grand?" His train gets in about an hour and a half ago.
Who's she talking to?
I can't think of
I don't know.
It was a stroke of luck, Mama said as they headed out to the garden. "We were planning to go to Japan in January anyway, so Frank could talk to government people about the Imperial Hotel. You know that part of the story, right? I heard he was under consideration. It's a huge position. Well, it's still up in the air, but we had very high hopes. It went well on that front, and it couldn't come at a better time if it comes." She stopped walking for a moment and looked Taylor in the eye. "I hate pretending with you. The truth is, Frank's work has practically dried up. It seems there's always something on the drafting table. But when it comes to getting a project built..." Taylor didn't speak, but took her elbow for a moment. He was a young man, Frank's employee. She shouldn't be talking to him about money. Anyway, these Spauldings got wind that Frank was traveling to Japan. He was going to look for Prince anyway. You know him. But suddenly there was money to spend on behalf of these brothers. It seems Frank is considered something of an expert on Japanese prints, and at ferreting them out. She aimed an amused look at him over her spectacles. "Quite an adventure you have?" Taylor had a knowing smile on his face. He'd been on a couple of French shopping sprees in Italy. "I never knew what the next day would bring," she said. "One moment we'd be chatting with a print seller in a perfectly dignified office of which Mama knew she was asking about the press debacle. Did you hear about it up there?" He nodded. "Only through a friend in Chicago. I didn't read any of it myself. It wasn't news in Salt Lake." Mama sighed. "Thank you, Taylor." She patted his hand. "People have been surprisingly generous. No one mentions it. Those who speak to us, that is." "And you? How are you?" "I'm all right. Just trying to get my bearings since we returned." "Still translating?" "Not at the moment. It's too long a story." "And your children have visited Wisconsin the second week of May. When she and Frank had returned to Taliesin in April, she'd been thrilled to be home in time to be the first.
I bet that's why we couldn't get in. I bet it was really busy.
Really?
Yeah, because I'm sure a lot of people go at different times of the book, so they can see what everything looks like. Well,
gorgeous silk kimonos that he arranged artfully throughout the room. The Far East melded into the American Middle West without a peep of protest. Mama and Frank's common history, but Fahrenheit, Italy,
what you doing?
Japan,